So I did this drawing originally for a promo giveaway that I was doing on Instagram for Monteverde, who make fountain pens and inks and all sorts of wonderful things. And I thought I'd include it because this is a process that I know I've covered before, but I just love, and I always keep returning to it as like one of my favorites. And this is such a good technique, using water-soluble ink. And like a brush pen, or take a little bit of water with you and take a little paintbrush, and you can sort of create quite a lot of texture and quite a lot of flat colour quite quickly. So the pen I'm using here is a Monteverde MP1 with a Omniflex nib on. Now the nib isn't that soft compared to some other flex nibs I've used, so I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing. I think this is a nice pen. I've certainly enjoyed using it, and the ink is by Monteverde. It's called Joy, and it's this wonderful sepia colour. It's not hugely, when you wet it, it doesn't do anything particularly interesting, but that's quite nice because it gives you a really flat colour, which is quite useful. So we'll talk a little bit here about what I'm actually doing in terms of the drawing. Is I'm basically looking at the reference image, and I'm vaguely going, well, that's about, now I've got the wall in, which I know is roughly, just a little bit under half the overall width. Most of the proportions kind of go off the wall. So I'm going, well, how much wider is that gable end than that little bit of wall in front of it? And you tend to find that if you can create one fixed part of the image that is roughly right, you can scale other things off that primarily. And often what I would choose here, and now I haven't done it in this case, but I would choose like an overall width of the house, and that's going to give you your relative height of the lighthouse, as well as like other dimensions in terms of the width of the wall, the height of the wall, and various things like that. But I guess I'm a little bit I'm quite experienced in drawing, so I can kind of busk it to a certain extent. But the other thing as well, I don't like a perfect drawing. I really don't. I see a lot of artists out there who take a lot of time to create some very perfect art, and it just doesn't really do anything for me. I'll be really honest and say that. I like stuff that's a bit scruffy. I like something that's got the language of the artist clearly visible in it, which is one of the reasons why I actually love line work in a sense, because line work is very specific to an artist. If you gave a lot of people just a palette of watercolor and said go and paint, if you had like 10 artists, yes, there would be big differences between them, but I genuinely believe that line work is more unique in a sense. I'd be able to tell you difference between friends of mine who are line and wash artists by their line work alone, but not always necessarily by their painting style, if that makes sense. So one of the things that I love about this technique is there's sort of 3 stages to it, really. The first stage is sort of sketching your world. The second stage is going in with a little bit of water. And the third stage is letting that dry completely and then going back in with the pen and adding in any of the details that you've put in but you've subsequently washed away with the water. And I think you could actually, make it. You could, of course, extend those stages and go a little bit of wash, a little bit of line work, a little bit of wash, and a little bit of line work. But I often think drying in between those phases is quite important, because if you have a piece of wet paper and you put that ink on with the fountain pen, it's just going to go soft again and spread out everywhere. Another thing I'm thinking about here, just before I put on the water, is a little bit of line work reinforcement. So you can see here I put just a very light pencil line in to represent the sea. Now, because a lot of this drawing is effectively negative space, so it's white, it's not coloured. Creating a kind of mid-tone for the sea, I think, works quite well here, because it really makes the whole of the lighthouse and the foreground, sort of pop forwards. So the contrast is really key there. Okay, for the sky, what I'm doing, this is a small mop brush, by the way, that I'm using here. It's a squirrel mop brush. And for the sky, what I'm using is just some water. I'm not really 100% convinced what I'm going to do with the sky, so I'm just using some clean water. As you can see, as soon as it touches any element up against the lighthouse there, it's straight away reactivating that water-soluble ink. So often if I'm doing something like this, I don't necessarily want to have the whole of the lighthouse surrounded by water, because you'll lose the whole line work around the lighthouse. So I've picked up a little bit of the ink that I've used for the diluted ink that I used for the sky, sorry, the water area there, which is just diluted by about sort of 2 or 3 to 1 there. So once that's dry, what I'm doing here is I'm going back in and I'm just reactivating some of the areas to actually create some shadow here on the lighthouse itself. So we've got a little bit of light, again, if you look at the reference drawing, primarily coming from the right hand side. So we've got some opportunities here to add in some shadow and to describe the form a little bit with just some really simple tones. Now I'm using just some clean water here, and what that's done is it's picked up a little bit of ink as we've gone along. It's reactivating some of that ink, and you'll see what effect that has on those windows if you see the detail that I've put previously in the windows there. So again, I'm just adding a little bit of detail where I see fit here. So I've hair dried that off again, and we're going to go in and put in some of the final details. So this is like reinstating a lot of the stuff that's got washed away. Now what I'm doing here is I'm using neat ink, obviously in the pen, and I'm going to go in and reinstate some of these lines that I washed away, as well as some little bits of detail that just basically went missing because they were wetted out. Now you can see the kind of nature of these sketches. They are relatively scruffy because you get a little bit of bleed here and a little bit of sort of mush there, and that's not something I dislike at all. I really like the kind of the slightly abstract nature of them, and I think it really adds to the feel of them being quite fast and a little bit rough. So I've just used the white gel pen there. I don't know whether you can see, but on the actual the tower of the lighthouse, there was a little bit of ink that was just annoying me. For all that I'm saying, you know, I don't mind some mistakes. I think occasionally there is always little things that you can correct. You know, you can go back and correct. So there we go, and that's the finished one. It's a really simple one, this. I think the reference drawing is super, so if you're one of my patrons, you'll better download this reference drawing and have a go at it, because it's an absolute corker. But really do try this technique. It's a lot of fun. There's far more of this kind of thing on my Patreon, where I go through, you know, lots of different versions of this. But yeah, like and subscribe, all that jazz, and thanks for stopping by. I'll see you again. Bye bye.